Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Categorically Romance podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Bree.
And today we have joining us, famous from Twitter. Their handle is FemTrash, but they are John, associate editor with Desire over at Harlequin. So, John, FemTrash, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm so excited to be here. I am not kidding when I say that I listen to pretty much every episode of the podcast. So I feel like I'm also in the presence of celebrity.
Oh my gosh. You don't understand how much we are a fan of yours, okay? We are fans of yours.
We are, definitely. And Bree, we have one person at Harlequin that listens to us. So
yeah. I mean, when we say they're probably up at Harlequin rolling their eyes, we know we're talking about John.
I mean, I'm never rolling my eyes. I am delighted. I think it's always a good thing to be talked about with the care and love that you both speak about Harlequin with. So trust me, it is only good. It is only good that we are listening.
Well, we kind of seen from following you online, like once you like transitioned into working over at Harlequin. So, I mean, we just love editors. So can you tell us like your editing journey and how you wound up at Harlequin? Like take us back to the beginning days. Tell us all the deets.
Oh my God, we're going back to the wilds of, gosh, it was probably like 2009, 2010, which shouldn't feel like a long time ago, but feels very long ago now. So I got my start in publishing because I was a ripe old 14 or 15 years old, and I was involved. I got on Twitter, I started reading book blogs, and I just really wanted a community. I grew up in a very small town in central Pennsylvania. It's the side that's known as Pennsatucky, not like the side close to Philadelphia or like actual people. So I really like felt isolated, especially as someone who was queer, who was fat, who was just very nerdy and loved to read. So, kind of coming into the book community at the time and seeing that there was just a space to have discussion and to talk about diversity and all of this was really exciting. So I got my start in publishing actually as a book blogger, and I primarily talked about YA, and primarily within that, like focused a lot on LGBTQIA plus YA. And through that, I also got involved with the romance world because shockingly, everything I loved had a romance in it. And we all know that is the pipeline to genre romance. And then through there, I did a lot of kind of romance reviewing for quite a long time. So I reviewed for a while at Dear Author. I also reviewed some for Romantic Times, which is now defunct, and Heroes and Heartbreakers, which is also now defunct. And I did that kind of through my blogging years, through my undergraduate time at college. And through that, I also had an editorial internship that turned into like, not really like a job, but like a little bit of a side hustle at a small YA house. And that's kind of how I got started editing. And I just always loved it. I love complaining about things and I love fixing things. So it makes editing an ideal job because I get to be critical of things all of the time and I get to be paid for it, which is quite exciting. So that's how I got started. And when I graduated, which was back in 2017, I was looking for a full-time job and I wanted to be in publishing, but publishing is notorious for not paying, very well for junior level employees and staff. So I was looking around at other spaces where I didn't have to move to New York City. And I got a job in instructional design back in the college town that I live in, Ithaca. And while I got that job, I also applied for a freelancing gig at Carina. And, the rest of the story, I got to freelance there, and I freelanced at Carina for about like 4.5 years until I made the transition into what I'm doing now, which is associate editing for Harlequin Desire and the upcoming New Sexy Contemporary program. So it's a very long journey, not that exciting, but maybe a little bit different in the sense that like I didn't have what many people have traditionally, which is like they start in publishing and they have an internship at a bigger house or at a literary agency, and then they work their way up from, it's like editorial assistant and then assistant editor editor and then associate editor, and it keeps going from there. So I kind of came at it sideways, but that's also my brand. So that's how it had to happen.
We're
So
big fans of stumbling into things.
right? And you may not remember this. You can probably, give us a better answer for now. But like when you entered the editing game and you got that first book to edit, how do you know how to edit a book?
I think it might have been another one of the Harlequin editors you two have talked to at some point, but I think somebody mentioned it on this podcast as editing being almost like an apprenticeship, and I think that's very accurate. Like when I got that first book, so like when I got the editorial internship way back when I was a senior in high school, I knew nothing about nothing. I reviewed books, but that's not editing.
Right.
So I just remember getting this manuscript as a test, and I, just took my reader brain and I was like, what would I fix about it? And at the time I would probably look back on it now and say it was much too heavy of an edit, or, maybe I wouldn't have even acquired the book at all. Not that it was a test, but, you kind of learn to do that, right? Like you just kind of start by doing, and then having another more experienced editor, tell you if you've missed something or if your feedback isn't working, and you kind of refine from there. But the benefit of having reviewed for such a long time is like, I think I had naturally taught myself how to think of all of the components of a story. And something that I think is helpful for editing is being able to have like a big picture view of anything. And I've just always kind of tended towards that. It's why I also like social justice topics, right? Because we talk about all of these things, all of these systems of oppression being interconnected. And a book is obviously not a set of systems of oppression, but it's still a set of things that all are interconnected all the time. So, and in some ways, a book is a lot simpler. So I think that I like learning about stuff like that and then reviewing books and thinking of all those components and how they worked was kind of my way of going into editing, and just being able to think of why, as a reader, I would have certain reactions to, like certain types of pacing or dialogue or narrative choices. And then you just keep doing it. And then eventually you just don't stop doing it, which is not a very satisfying answer, but it just kind of seems to be the case for editing.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we're going to get to all the sexy changes, but so you started off like really reading and reviewing YA, and everything you enjoyed had a romance. So like, do you remember the first time you actually sought out a romance?
Yes. So, I mean, I did read romance at that time as well, but it wasn't as consistent. So my mom was always a Harlequin reader. So now she's much more in her mystery and thriller era. But when I was growing up, my mom had a subscription to Harlequin Intrigue.
Oh
And
my
she also,
gosh.
I know, right? Like, and this was back in, I want to say like the early to mid 2000s. So she was, that was like a great time for these subscriptions. And she also, I think, sometimes got additional ones. She's also a cowboy fan. So I think she got when they reissued and then restarted the Montana Mavericks series. Like I also remember her getting those. So my first non-category romance was Joanna Lindsay's Gentle Rogue, which a dear friend of mine kind of gave to me when we were in middle school. It was that classic, like, my mom read this and she let me read it, and now you can read it. And of course, enthralled. I mean, come on. How do you not? Like, if you've seen the original cover of Gentle Rogue alone, like, I was destined to fall for romance. And then my first category was, ironically, also had Rogue in the title. It was Rogue Stallion by Diana Palmer, which is the first Montana Mavericks book. So, I have these, it was very classic, and if you've ever read Rogue Stallion, it's like the hero has like a literal like mat of chest hair. I think in the original 90s book, I think he's described as like a Republican on like the second page. It's just like, it's very of its time, but I was just enthralled because, when you read your first romance, there's nothing like it.
Okay, we know that mom is in her mystery thriller era, but like, what does mom think of you now being an editor at Harlequin?
I mean, it's her fault. So
Shout
You
out to
did this to me,
mom.
Mom.
she has to like it. I mean, it was a journey, right? Because my journey with romance and being public about it was also very much a journey about my sexuality and about coming out. Like, so very early on when I was reading romance along with reading YA, I was befriending some romance authors online and they were sending me their works. And I also worked a lot with the first editor at Harlequin Teen back when it was called Harlequin Teen. It's now called Inkyard Press. So I just was having these kind of natural relationships building with romance folks. And my mom and I had kind of a breaking point when the great Sarah Morgan sent me a few of her Presents novels.
No way.
Yes. And my mom opened the package and she was very upset. And this was before she had accepted my sexuality. And, and she said some things that were very, just very unkind. And to put it mildly, I won't put our trauma out there for everybody. But it was a journey, right? So at first, like she saw it as feminine. She saw it as a lot of things that, she does just not have the space to unpack. And, it was a journey, but now she really accepts it and she appreciates it. I mean, I'm the only person in the family that knows what she likes to read and how to buy her books. And I can also give her things. And, I always love when I edit something that I know that she'll like to read because our tastes don't cross over that much. But, every once in a while, something comes in and it feels really special to be able to share that with her and know that she's, the reason why I've kind of gotten here today, even if she didn't necessarily want to be. Some time ago.
Oh, I love that. Well, okay. Tell us about okay, so I feel like I have to do this in like sequential order. Don't worry, please. This is just how my brain works. So you get in. Did you know you were going to Desire? Like, how did we end up at Desire?
Yeah, so the job was meant to be at Desire, so I did know that going in. And I had also, heard some very minor rumblings that there were some fun things happening. And I am very good at being loud and I'm very good at being different. And I'm very good at rolling with things that are changing. So I just figured it was kind of a wonderful time to join in. And, and I've always loved category romance. I mean, I've read category very early and, some of my favorite romances are categories. Like Sarah Morgan's are some of, like, to me, my all-time favorite romances. For instance, if you've never read One Night, 9 Months Scandal, it's like, like that Presents novel imprinted on me and I still think about it on probably like a monthly basis at least.
I would love for us to get let's just get Sarah Morgan to write. Give us one more Sarah Morgan Presents.
I love Sarah and I love her. I love her single title, like women's fiction right now, but like I gotta tell you, like I would pay a lot of personal money just to get another Presents from her. So I was excited about that, but it was always intended to be Desire. And I honestly, like, I love every one of our lines. Like, I love the folks that work at Harlequin. It's a genuinely great working environment, which was honestly what I needed after a very different working environment that I came from. And I mean, Stacy Boyd and Aaron Toma, who are the other two folks on the editorial team, are just some of the most amazing people and amazing editors. And, I mean, it's a great team. So it was very exciting to be joining up with Desire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're always thinking like, okay, so you're an editor for Desire. And like for anybody that's listening that just so happened to stumble upon this podcast and they've never read Desire, how would you, as someone who works with these books, describe it to them or pitch it to them?
So I think I don't know if it's our current tagline, but I think one of our taglines was like, like an insight into America's like wealthy elite or something like that. Other folks have compared it to kind of be like the American Presents. The way that I think of Desire is it is like in its current format, it does kind of feature the fantasies of wealth and billionaires, but it does so in, a way that is more inspired by, soap operas, that's inspired by, I think, being willing to take some different kinds of narrative risks. Like, I think if folks like love presents, but maybe want a little bit more of, kind of an interesting, like, equitable relationship with the main characters, and want to see them, maybe more in like a family environment or a business environment, Desire is really the way to go. And what I love about it is that I do think like there's a really broad range of what Desire authors can do, right? I mean, we have like Texas Cattlemen's Club, and we have like our rough and tumble cowboys, but we also have traditional billionaires, right? But then we also have people and writers that are really experimenting with a lot of things. And even really early into coming into Desire, I was just elated by kind of the variety of authors and works that I got to work with. So for instance, I work with Kathy Garbera. She has a new trilogy coming out. She has one coming out now that's about like a makeover firm that makes.
Yeah, it's like the Image series or something.
Project series, yes. And that's exciting because it reverses the makeover trope, right? The heroines are all the professional makeover people, and the billionaires are all the ones who need some zhuzhing up. And then she has another trilogy coming out after that that's loosely based on fairy tales that's called the Gilbert Curse trilogy. And it's about this like cursed family in this small town who are all very wealthy, representing different kind of fairy tale elements. And then the heroines are all kind of coming in and slowly unraveling the curse while kind of bringing a resurgence into this small space. And it was so exciting because it does have these trappings that we think of with category and with Desire, but it also, it plays with fairy tale themes, but it also is playing with these themes of, revitalizing smaller and mid-sized towns and handling generational trauma. And Kathy in particular is somebody that really likes to experiment and play. And that was exciting, right? But then I also work with folks like Yvonne Lindsay and Joanne Rock and Rachel Bailey, who all do these totally different versions of these stories, right? So I think it's a great line for people who like those tropes, but want to see them told slant, right? Or to kind of see them in a different way.
Well, now I know we need to add that to the list, Erin. We are going to be chatting with Miss Catherine Garbera in January, so I need to ask her about this.
Yeah, both those series.
A few other things that are on the list to come out in the next couple of years too. So I think she'll have a lot to discuss with you.
I'm excited because so before you even got on the team, changes were already happening, like they were already talked about. Because honestly, I thought you got on the team and started shaking shit up.
I wish that I was that powerful.
Okay.
No, I think that Harlequin is always thinking about how to make sure that we're meeting the needs of as many readers as possible, right? And we're always trying to think of how to stay afloat in the romance landscape, right? 2024 is going to be our 75th anniversary, which is huge, right? Like we've been around a long time, and you don't stay around for that long without being able to think ahead, right? And to adapt. And, I think that there is always this awareness that we want to be able to offer things that are different, that are meeting different needs. And it was just the right time, right? Like I just happened to come in at the right time, which I love. So not that powerful, but yeah, changes were already happening, and it was just early enough that I think we were really starting to crystallize what that would mean. And now we're getting to the point where we're about to share that, right? Where we are starting to share it, and it's exciting.
Okay, so what can you tell us about it?
So we're launching a new sexy contemporary line. It does not currently have a name, and I promise we're not withholding a name. We don't have one, and we're not just playing mysterious woo-woo here.
Okay, sure.
We're genuinely still figuring it out, but it's going to be a new sexy contemporary romance line. It's going to be between like 65 and 70,000 words, so it's more aligned with, say, like Harlequin romantic suspense, Harlequin historical, Harlequin special edition, as far as like the length.
So a little thicker.
A little thicker, a little chunkier.
Okay.
but for good reason. So the idea is that this line is it is new sexy contemporary, so it will be high heat. It's going to be higher heat than what Presents and Desire are now. Not like erotic romance, but it is going to have a wide spectrum that is going to be very sensual. And we really want it to speak to, we wanted to speak to readers who love romance now, and we also wanted to speak to readers who are coming into romance, right? Like, we're seeing a resurgence of people that are starting to discover that this genre exists, right? Like, they're filtering in through TikTok, through Colleen Hoover and Sarah J. Maas, through fan fiction. And, like, at first, like, they get caught up in these waves of these single authors, but then, like, once they do what romance readers do, right? Which is realize that they just love romance, right? Like, they want more. And, it seems like it's a really good time to give them something that can maybe give them an entry point, not just into Harlequin, but into the genre, right? And into what we have loved about the genre for a long time. So that's kind of the kind of main focus. And with that, we want it to be really character driven. All of the Harlequin lines are complex and have complex characters, but, it's really about kind of giving it a more contemporary approach, right? So rather than having a lot of maybe stricter line guidelines, we're making the line much more kind of broad in terms of what the guidelines are, in order to kind of build out more character depth and potential, and, trying to like see what else romance can be, right? And what romance can be for Harlequin as well as for, the genre as a whole. So yeah, it's sexy. It's in that word count. It's character driven. We want it to be diverse. We want it to really represent people of all backgrounds. So it's not going to be wealth focused. It's not going to focus just on the United States. We really want it to represent like the widest possible, world that we live in, and the unique kind of experiences that people want to see themselves in when it comes to romance. So that's kind of that's the basics. I could ramble on about it forever just because I think about it every day.
I know. Well, we think about it every day. Okay, I have questions. Okay.
Okay.
I've been jotting down while you were talking because I have to ask you while we have you here. Okay, first and foremost, you mentioned how it's going to be a little broad. When I think of broad, I think of Blaze. When you say high heat, I think of Dare. How are we going to ensure that this line lasts, unlike its predecessors?
Well, on our end, we're continuing to do as much as we can to make sure that it lasts. I'll give Blaze credit. Blaze lasted a very long time.
It did.
And Blaze was an offshoot of Temptation, right? So it that legacy was actually quite long for Harlequin.
But with Blaze, though, because sometimes with Blaze, we've had these conversations where it was too broad. And, with the thing we love about category is we come to each line for something specific.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You were hitting the nail on the head. So I think, I think Blaze, I love that it was experimental, but I do think that sometimes, so the difference I would say between this and say Blaze is that we are pretty solid about wanting it to stay a fully contemporary line. We're willing, I think, to potentially consider some light suspense elements or very, very light magical elements, but I don't think we're going to try to push into those arenas the way that Blaze maybe did with more, wholeheartedness, right?
No cowboy vampires in the new
cowboy vampires. I still read Blaze for fun. I still read old category romances for fun, which maybe seems very strange to people, but I enjoy doing it. I
love that you do.
I just read a Blaze. There was a Blaze miniseries back in 2007 called The Sixth Sense.
Of course.
It was about a family of, I shouldn't be laughing because it's entertaining, but it's about a family of folks that can speak to ghosts, right? So there was stuff like that. We had historicals and time travels, and there were also quite a lot of kind of suspense adjacent Blazes, especially towards the end of the line. And I think that we recognize that I think readers appreciated that, but it can be a little bit to detriment, right? Like, especially in category, when you only have so many words, right? Like, when you only have so many words, you really want to make sure that you're focused enough that you're getting what you and the reader want out of it. So yes, so it's going to be more focused in that direction. So rest assured, no cowboy vampires, no like sex with ghosts, although it was really interesting to read about, and I'm glad we did it.
We love a ghost story here.
And then in comparison to Dare, I would say that not only is it longer than Dare, but I mean, I'd say really compared to both lines, like the high heat is going to be important, but it's not going to be the central focus of the texts themselves. So, you know, like if you look at early Blaze, it's kind of similar to early Dare in terms of the fact that it's very much about the eroticism. It was very much about like playing with taboos, right? Like it's like, oh, this stuff is really new. It's exciting. We're not seeing it as much. And that's not really where this line is going to go. Like this line is in a lot of ways going to represent titles that you would see in single title, right? Like they're going to be ideas and concepts that could, you know, that are large, that are, you know, encompassing like a really strong character arc, and are contemporary, but just so happen to be very sexy. And the reason why we want to do that, right, is like a lot of readers in the market right now, I think, are finding that it can be hard to find a higher heat contemporary romance when the current kind of packaging of traditional romance as a whole right now is in flux, right? Like we're seeing all these illustrated covers. We're seeing all of these books that like are marketed as romance, but like sometimes are more women's fiction or chick lit or they're closed door. And you just, it's hard to tell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, we want to give those readers that like want to be assured that it's going to be sexy, but also complex, something where they can go to it. And I also think something that's great about category is experimentation, right? Because we're cheaper, right? Like we're not a trade paperback. I think for younger readers who are trying to discover new authors and figure out what they like, right, being able to offer something that's at a like more affordable price range is really exciting because it means that they're more likely to actually try a new author or try a book that's maybe not so kind of readily commercial in terms of it's like, oh, it's not just about like witches around Halloween or something, right? Like it's a little bit more, you know, unique. And I think that's something that we're really excited about with it, right? Is it gives us this chance to kind of break down some barriers in terms of contemporary romance. And I think show that like the industry can push a lot farther than I think we maybe are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask? We just recorded another episode today.
Yes, Aaron, because I was gonna say it. Okay.
I put a question to Reddit to people that have never read a Harlequin or had a Harlequin category specifically and asked them why. And a lot of the answers was that it just does not come across their radar. They're not seeing it recommended to them through the social medias, through Amazon. How are we going to make sure that this line gets in front of the eyes of new readers?
I mean, we're very determined to get it in front of new readers. I think in a lot of ways, this is going to look and feel very different, I think, from traditional category lines. I've kind of been selling it as a kind of a category imprint hybrid or a category single title hybrid. So the covers are not going to look kind of as uniform as the other series covers. We're packaging them in a way that's much more focused on each individual book. So we'll have some illustrated covers, we'll have some photorealistic, we're going to have a mixture of, you know, kind of graphic covers with photos or text. You know, I mean, playing with what the market is doing now, but doing it in a way that's, you know, a little more category. So it's a little bit more tropey. It's a little bit more explicitly romantic and sexy. And that's definitely going to be part of it, right? Because something that I think a lot of readers who haven't read category before is like the sameness is really appealing when you want comfort, right? But if you've never tried it before, it is hard for it to feel like each story stands on its own, whether you're looking at them on the rack or whether you're looking at them online. And I think that readers want and want to feel like there's kind of a greater sense of authenticity. And I think every category book is authentic. I think that every author approaches it with nuance and with complexity. It's more about just finding a way to show the reader that that's what's actually inside of the cover, right? Because it just makes sense. And we're just in a totally different world now, right? Like when category romance was big, right? Like people were buying books in grocery stores and they didn't have the internet to just readily discover a bunch of things on Kindle Unlimited or on Goodreads. And having that kind of specific branding and consistency was very helpful then, right? But now readers, like, they do their own research, right? They look at Goodreads, they look at Reddit, like they want something that kind of feels like it's a little bit more holistic in terms of how they're seeing it and how it's being marketed to them. And that's kind of the approach we want to take. And we're also talking about what this can mean as far as like trying to get category in other spaces, right? So like, I know we would love to try to get this line in indie bookstores. Like we want folks to start seeing Harlequin category as something that isn't just kind of in this one space, like this one rack at Walmart, right? But that it is and should be kind of amongst like the rest of romance, right? Like it doesn't deserve to be put into a separate space just because it's Harlequin, right? Because like, that's not fun.
No, yeah. Well, as someone who does, I mean, I place my order every month online and then I kind of just filter in to the Walmart periodically throughout the month and pick up whatever I didn't get. Are we going to see these on the shelves? Are we going to see them in Walmart?
I mean, that's the hope. I can't speak to like the, you know, every bit of distribution at this moment, but you know, we're not foregoing what we're already doing, right? Like the goal is not to stop what we're already doing. It's just to expand, right? To try and find these other avenues. And they are going to be in print. We're actually thinking about putting them in Mass Market Max, which
I love Mass Market Max.
Thank you. I'm glad somebody does.
Oh, I know a lot of people don't. I think they're adorable. I love them. But I mean, if we kept them in the regular category, do you think that would, I don't know, there's a lot of romance readers don't do mass market. But I feel like if you love category, you do. Like, you know, I don't know. I personally would love them to be in Mass Market Max. I don't know.
I mean, we want them to be in it, obviously. Yeah. But I mean, for me, I think what's exciting about Mass Max, right, is like it's this sweet spot between the mass markets that we know and love and trade, right? And Mass Market Max is like a single title Mass Market Max or a category Mass Market Max is basically the same price as the mass market's always been, right? Maybe it's a little higher right now, but it's still like $8.99 or $9.99 USD. And I think that like it's exciting to have something that's more accessible, right? That's more price accessible. And then also like I personally love that Mass Max is a little chunkier because it leaves you more room for a beautiful cover and you can make the package feel a little bit more luxurious and exciting. And it's also easier to hold. Like when I try to read like the traditional like category mass markets, like my fingers cramp up because like I basically look like a little crab, right? Trying to hold them open the whole time. You know, like you sit there like and even I read them fast, but then like by the end, like my hands like won't open. Like I just walk around like a crab person. And Mass Market Max kind of gives a lot more comfort in terms of that handheld experience, which I really like.
So have y'all discussed like how many would come out a month?
We have. So it's going to be a 4 book a month program. So that, and it's because of the length, right? And also because we want to make sure that every book is going to have the capability to shine and show out. And, you know, I mean, I think that larger programs also make sense for other category lines. It's just, you know, it's that balance of making sure that, you know, we're able to get these new titles discovered by readers. And, you know, we don't want to flood the market either. You know, we want to make sure that each one is getting the editorial treatment it needs and that we're able to put as much into PR and distribution and marketing as we can. So, yeah, I mean, and I think 4 will hopefully be satisfying. But of course, if everybody loves this line and buys them all and then we have to publish more, I'm not going to complain. So
I don't think the authors are either.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'm trying to make this make sense, but here we go. So Okay, it's safe to say with this new line, it's not going to be like the sex sells, right? Is that correct? Is that safe with to say like Dare and Blaze and Temptation, the sex kind of sold? This new line isn't aiming for that, right?
Yes. So, like, if you even look at the deals that we've announced under the new line so far, like for instance, I acquired this really amazing book by Timothy Janovsky, which is
Yes.
about like a gay man who loved supermarket sweep and ends up in like a fake relationship to try and get on a supermarket sweep style show in Los Angeles, right? Like that premise isn't about the sex at all, right?
At
It's going
all,
to be
right.
very sexy, but that premise, it's like versus, you know, if you look at maybe some of the early Blaze titles or the Dare titles, it's like this heroine owns an erotic bakery and every lollipop or cake is shaped like a penis, and you know, it's just it's which is exciting, but it's very overt, right? So these titles are not going to be kind of in that just very overt lineup, right? It's much more about the book feeling like it's just a really organic, exciting experience, and then you know that it's going to be sexy and explicit. And I also think that's important because it gives us the space for that sexiness to be inclusive in a way that I think can be hard if the sex is meant to be very overt, right? So one book that I loved that's a trade title is called The Romantic Agenda by Claire Kahn, and it's a super sexy book. But what's really cool about it is that the heroine is asexual. So it's extremely sexy, but the sexiness is also able to coincide with an ace character, right? Which is something that's a little hard to do when you want the sex to kind of just be simple.
Oh, I am totally an asexual, and I can't even imagine trying to describe it.
Oh my God. It's so, would totally recommend that book. It's like basically like if my best friend's wedding took place in like an isolated cabin and had a happily ever after with somebody else.
So okay, so it sounds like okay, I love hearing you describe all of that. So, was it just and like hearing that story, that specific story you just described to us, I'm like, what line would that have fit in? It doesn't sound like it maybe could have been like a special edition. Did we not have a space? Because I feel like a lot of the lines have been like romance, for example. I love the romance line. And like once upon a time, you weren't getting sex on the page in romance like that. But now you can. But it sounds like that story specifically, I'm like, I don't know what line that would have fit in. Like maybe a special edition. Like, was it the stories that we want to now have within Harlequin? We don't necessarily have a space already for them to fit in, so we need to do something different? Or could we have just like, or would it have not worked to change some of the reader expectations or whatever for the lines that are already there? Because I mean, we are getting contemporary stuff and we are getting heat in the lines that we already have. But is it
That's a
just
really,
readers aren't seeking, they're not looking at those lines, so let's do something different? Does that make
that's it.
sense?
No, that makes sense. I think that's a very insightful question. So I would agree that I think there's a lot of types of stories that can fit into other lines, right? Like the Harlequin editors are always thinking of how to be more inclusive, how to expand what we can with our lines. And, you know, that's a really positive part about Harlequin. I think that like some of it is that like there's a lot of stories that we really don't quite have the space for. So like special edition, for instance, right? It is getting to a space where some of the stories can have a higher heat level, but it isn't the line expectation, right?
Right.
And then it does lean more towards traditional family structures. You know, it's usually like more secondary characters in small towns. And, you know, that does, you know, like the lines build up expectation over time, right? And I think that we can always push those expectations. But the challenge with an already established line, right, is that there's an established core set of readers and we still
Mhm.
have to bring them along to whatever we're doing, right? So you can change things or you can flex them, but it's not like you can totally just give, like, I mean, if you go too far out, right, you have what happened as you were describing with like, late stage Blaze, right? Where some people feel like it's too broad. It doesn't always have to be like, oh, suddenly there are cowboy vampires for somebody to feel like it's too broad. And I also just think that even with those, right, like, I mean, they're getting sexier, but they're not necessarily, very explicitly sexy. And so like something that like is going to differentiate the sexiness in this line, right, is that it's going to use explicit language. So something about like presents or like desire right now is that the language can sometimes be a little bit more euphemistic, right? It's very like adjective oriented, and it's very much about the like emotional experience with the physical. But it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily plain or and it's not always quite as experimental. I do think that we're seeing more playfulness there, but it's not quite there, right? So I think that that's kind of another element of it, is that it's thinking about sex in maybe a way that our current lines don't necessarily have the structure to allow in quite as broad of a way as we might hope. But it's a good question. I mean, I think that a lot of these stories could fit in some place, but they might have to be tweaked in a way that I don't think we necessarily want to tweak them, right? And I think that's why it's exciting, because building a new line where we're not as strict about certain guidelines and certain like plot expectations gives us the opportunity to let authors do things that they might not initially think they can do in a Harlequin title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exciting because, like, I think Harlequin readers, like, it's great to have consistency, right? But it's also exciting to be able to know that you're still going to get that Harlequin feeling out of something, but know that it might be really different from something else you've read. And I think that variety could be really appealing to even our current readers, right? Like, let alone to new folks.
I don't know why I'm feeling like this is kind of like the resurgence of Kiss in a way. I'm just excited. I can't wait to read it and see what
I can't
what
wait
we're
for you
gonna
to
get.
read it either. I mean, I loved Kiss too. I mean, I miss Kiss on a regular basis. It's funny. I think this has kind of shades of a lot of different lines, right? It's a little bit of Blaze, it's a little bit of Dare, it's a little bit of Kiss. It's even a little bit of super romance, because I think super romance was doing that like character driven, grounded stuff really well. I think it's just about finding a way to put all of it together so that way the whole is more than the sum of its parts, right?
Is there anything you're hoping to see? Is there anything you're looking for? Like, you shared a really exciting premise, but like, what's the last thing that you read and that really excited you that you're like, I want to see more of this? Like, what are
Oh my
you
God.
hoping comes across your desk?
So many things. I mean, the excitement about this line, right, is that it's so broad that there's really so many different types of stories that we could work on. So, some of the other things that I've acquired, just to give people like an idea of just maybe the expansiveness of my taste, is so I acquired a Black Sapphic Romance by Mecca James, which is between a physical therapist who doesn't like sports but ends up working in athletics because it's kind of part of her long-term like 10-year career plan, and she ends up having a one-night stand with a woman who turns out to be a WNBA player on the team that she starts working for the next day, which is exciting.
Oh, I love that.
Kathy, we haven't announced it yet, but Kathy is working on a story about a bookbinder and a very grumpy man who wants to acquire some antique books from her that she got from his grandfather, which is very fun if you like, a very, very light kind of witchy element, but without the magic, and it's Kathy, so it's exciting. And then my colleague Erin acquired a book that's also a Black Sapphic romance about two women who used to be on a bowling team in high school, and they were rivals, and then they have to come back and coach the team to victory.
Oh my
gosh. And like that one's exciting. And then I also acquired something by Adele Buck, whom I love, and it's about a English professor who I think is like 40 or in her early 40s, and she is being harassed by this colleague of hers that she went on a date with, and he decides to try and win her back by serenading her with a piano on the quad at the college they both work at. And then she decides to take a can of roach spray and a lighter and like ended up in flames. And somebody sees her doing, like, about to do this and, you know, calls 911, and she ends up falling for the firefighter that answers the call. And, you know, so it's a really wide variety of stuff, right? So I think, like, across all of them, like, what is consistent besides the inconsistency is it's real people, right? It's like, it's people that may be unique but they're not super rich, right? They're not necessarily super famous. There are people who have goals that are strong. They're finding themselves, or they have recently found themselves, and they're trying to get to a place in their life where they're happy. And the romance is kind of a beautiful way of supporting that, right? So we're looking for stories that really kind of emphasize that people right now, right, like, they want love and they want community and they want support, but they also want to be able to be their best versions of themselves. And they don't want to feel like they need to be in a romance in order to get to that person, right? So the romance is important. It is a romance, but we don't want to feel like if they don't have the romance, they're not going to get there, right? It's like, instead, it's like, oh, like, you're getting to be your best version of yourself. And this person that you're falling in love with is somebody that is really aiding you in that growth, right? And you're aiding them. And you both are just so much happier together. And you're also having amazing sex. And, you know, so I think those are the kinds of overall stories. You know, we've talked about, like, we want tropes, but we especially want kind of different tropes, right? So right now we're seeing a lot of, like, fake dating. We don't necessarily need a lot more fake dating, you know, but like things like forced proximity. You know, if somebody has an interesting play on marriage of convenience, or, you know, if they want to write things about topics like abortion or healthcare, or if they want to tackle things like racism and transphobia, you know, like we really just want to see reality, right? But through a romance lens. So I know that's kind of a very roundabout way of not saying anything, but saying a lot.
I feel like you said a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
I'll give people one title that is actually out right now, though, because otherwise, like, no one can read these books yet. I'd say, like, one book that I think exemplifies what I, like, imagine this line to be is Bet on It by Jodie Slaughter, which is a romance between two characters who have severe anxiety disorders. One is a fat Black woman, and she, like, moves to this small town in the South because the cities are, like, way too much for her. And she decides to try and find community by going to the local bingo hall. And she ends up, like, really getting along with, like, the nice little white ladies that are doing bingo on a regular basis. And one day, like, this woman that she basically becomes besties with at bingo, like, has, like, a surgery and needs to, like, recover. So her really hot, tall Viking, like, grandson comes to help her out, and she forces him to come to bingo, and they totally have, like, amazing chemistry. But because he doesn't want to be there, because he has a lot of trauma around growing up in this small town and being bullied, like, you know, there's a lot of, you know, will they, won't they, they're uncertain. So they decide to form a bingo sex pact where, like, they'll only have sex if, like, one of them gets a bingo on their regular bingo nights. And of course, it doesn't just stay in the bingo hall, but it starts there. So I think that encompasses a lot, right? Because it's fun, it's different, but it also is, like, it's really human, right? And it's like, these are issues and challenges that reflect what a lot of people are experiencing right now. And they're challenges that can make you feel like you don't have access to romance, right? So something that's so romantic about these stories that we want to publish, right, is that we want to show that you can go through these really difficult, complicated experiences, and that you deserve love, right? And that love deserves to come to you in a way that makes you and your life better, however that is. So yeah, that's one book that I think people can look to and get a kind of idea of what we're looking for.
I love that.
Okay.
Sexy bingo.
Yeah.
Yes, no, sexy bingo. I didn't know it could happen until it happened.
Anything can be romantic. So I need to ask, you kind of implied it through the things you've described with some of the plots, but I had a hankering that this line or imprint was going to be a much more inclusive and queer positive, queer-friendly space for those kind of romance stories. Is that true?
I mean, of course, I think that all the imprints are working on their diversity with queer stories. And I don't think any of the Harlequin imprints have any restrictions that inherently, remove queer stories from them. But I think we have an opportunity by making a new imprint with this particular structure right now to bring in a lot of queer stories from the ground up, right? And we're in a space where there's more queer romance writers who are, actively trying to get traditionally published. And it's just kind of a beautiful kismet of that. So, we do have a lot of queer titles on deck. And, a couple of us in the editorial team are a little gay. So I think that that's going to come bleeding into what we work on. So, but yes, I think that you're going to see a lot of that consistently. And the goal is that, we want people to be able to see themselves in these stories. And that's not just queerness, right? It's also race, it's also disability, it's also religion and ethnicity and culture and physical location. And, it's just I think it's an opportunity to show people that Harlequin can provide this romance feeling to so many people, right? And it's not just limited to certain types of people, right? Or in certain situations.
I just have to ask before we get off here, how does it feel? You shared with us your backstory, how you got into editing, and now you're part of Harlequin, and you're part of Harlequin when this incredible change is happening, and you're getting to work with Joanne Rock, Catherine Garbera, these authors that have had these fantastic careers, and you're acquiring new authors and bringing them on, and what you all are doing is just so fantastic, because there are, I feel thousands of new romance readers between Bridgerton being crazy on Netflix, the pandemic. I see it all the time. Every time I go to Barnes and Noble, I see these young women in the romance section, and I'm just wow, this is TikTok, this is Bridgerton, this just there. It's so big right now. How does it feel for you being part of what's happening now and doing what you do?
It's always exciting. I think when you love reading and you love romance, it's always a fun time to be a romance reader, but especially now. And it's not even just the fact that so many more people are coming into it, but I just think it's exciting to be in a space in a time, right, where we can really just say yes. And we can keep asking, what else can we do? What else can we try? The kinds of stories that I've been reading for this imprint are so exciting, and there's stuff that, might be coming down the pipeline that will be exciting in totally different ways. And
can we get some monsters or no?
I don't think, I think if you want this to not go the route of Blaze, no, but I would be remiss. If anybody else at Harlequin listens to this, if you can give me the funding to do a monster romance line, I would say yes in a heartbeat.
Not even a lot. Okay, hear me out. Aaron and I were just talking about this today. Harlequin, there was this series once upon a time. I can't remember the name of it. It took place on a ship in the Mediterranean, and it was just a 20-book miniseries. It didn't belong to a line, but it was category. It was part of Harlequin. And I'm can we just get a 10-book category series that doesn't necessarily belong to a line of gothic romances or something? Can you imagine Kathy Garbera, Pippa Roscoe, Reese, these incredible authors just contributing to this series, and then it goes away? Just give me a random mini series. I'll be happy.
I will file that away.
Thank you. Okay.
Because I would love it too. It's obviously for this line, I have to put on my contemporary romance reader hat, but I love all kinds of romance. There are some that I don't read very frequently. I will fully admit, I don't identify as a Christian, so I rarely read love inspired, and I think that the authors are great and the team is wonderful. It's just not my cuppa most of the time. But, otherwise, It's broad. I love me a good monster romance, like CM Nacosta with the like orcs. Yes. Like demons.
Yeah.
Yes. Like several demons at the same time. Yes. I would love that. Like, I think that there's a lot of possibility, right? But of course, like the hard part with traditional publishing is that there's just a lot of other, there's factors that are beyond Harlequin that we always have to consider. And like, that's a challenge, right? Because I think people forget that like there's just, you've talked about it a little bit on the podcast here with other folks about like distribution can sometimes be challenging, right? Like getting things into certain stores, not just on time, but even just getting people at these stores to be convinced that it's worth buying. And especially because sometimes those folks can be thinking more conservatively, right? And not just conservative in terms of like, like the political stuff, but also just in terms of like monster fucking, like they're like, how could we possibly do this book where he's like a eldritch demon that is thousands of years old and she's 19 and it's a hard sell. So but I mean, if we ever could, I would love to. I miss Nocturne regularly as well, so I feel your pain.
Well, that's what it came. We were talking Nocturne today, and we were like, okay, they would never bring Nocturne back, but like a random periodic miniseries would be nice. Just saying, it can be digital only. I will download it off the website and read it on Glows. It's fine. Just saying. Just saying. Okay, so for the new series, I have to ask: are the new series going to have like our typical Harlequin, like? You look at the cover, you see the title, you know exactly what you're going to get, or are y'all going to steer? Like, are y'all going to do something different?
I think it's going to be a mixture of both. Like, I think we still want people to be able to see the hooks and the tropes because I think readers just love that regardless of whether it's with Harlequin or someplace else, right? But I think it's going to be a little bit more, I don't want to say subtle, but I think it's going to be a little bit more playful and a little bit more unique to each title. Right now, our titling does get somewhat consistent, right? Like you can probably think of a category line and then you can think of a title that could probably be in that line just by putting random words together, right? I mean, of course, that's also how you end up with stuff like the Shakes Virgin Stable Girl, but or Pregnesia. Both are real.
Snowbound with the billionaire prince.
Yes. So it's not going to quite be like that. And I mean, of course, like editors, like we work really hard on the titles. Like it is a serious process, but I do think it's going to be a little bit more specialized as well. And that's, just for a lot of reasons. And readers like that. Like readers do like knowing what they're going to get, right? Like sometimes you see a book and you're like, oh, like love comes softly. And you're like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know any, like, it's like other than love being in the title, I know nothing. Like, so
why is love coming softly?
Exactly. So I think they're going to still give you an idea of what you're going to get, but it's going to feel a little bit more, I think maybe feel a little bit different. I was going to say more different, but that doesn't make any sense. So
Bree, I think we're going to have Mr. Tony Harvaroth back to give us the scoop on what his plans are for the covers.
I know we got to dig deep on this.
Tony's great. Yes, you should totally have him back.
When is it coming?
So we're launching in January of 2024, which feels far away, maybe, but feels very close to us.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Publishing works so far ahead. So yes, they'll be coming in January of 2024, and we're going to be keeping folks updated. And I mean, it is exciting because like this new line is launching at the same time as our 75th anniversary. So I think there's going to be a lot of excitement. I think Harlequin is going to be very visible and doing a lot that year. So just, you all can keep an eye out on that. And, our team is going to be trying to get the word out in a lot of different ways, podcast tour included. So
yes.
Yes.
And you
Very
can always
excited.
have me or somebody else back to talk more about it once we actually have stuff out in the wild too, because, right now we're working with a lot of ethereal stuff and it will continue to solidify, which will be exciting.
Well, I mean, you have to come back. Just saying.
We're definitely having you back
have a
on.
direct line to me. You two can ask me for anything at any time. Yeah, and if you have other questions, also, like, I'm happy to answer them. Like, it doesn't have to be so concentrated. I'm maybe too talkative and too open. So,
Well, we have a podcast and we need people to talk. So, I mean, you're perfect. We love you. Oh my gosh. Okay, so where can people keep up with you online? Is there a specific way that anybody that's interested that are y'all going to do any pitches so you think you can write or any events for it? Like, or are you just people can find you on like Write for Harlequin and email you a manuscript? Like, how do you want people to go about that?
I mean, there's so many different ways. So we do have a submissions call and Write for Harlequin. So you can find the information there. And our line guidelines are on Submittable under the New Sexy Contemporary tab. So if anything tells you that we genuinely don't have the name yet, the tab itself is still New Sexy Contemporary. So that should hopefully give a good idea of what we're looking for. And if you have a submission there and you want it to be directed to a specific editor, whether it's me or Stacy or Aaron, that's part of the submittable form that you can fill out. Of course, like if folks just want to see my incredibly messy ramblings about publishing and non-publishing related topics, I'm on Twitter at @fem_trash. So I think it just, if you're interested, like, we encourage you to submit. The exciting thing about having a new line, right, is like we're bringing a lot of Harlequin authors in. So it is going to be a lot of your favorites, but there's also going to be a lot of new folks. So it's a great time to put yourself out there if you have something that fits. Or if especially if you're the kind of writer that you never really thought your contemporary quite had a space at Harlequin, this might be the space. And, especially if it's different, we really want to see it.
We want to see it. You're a celeb to us, okay?
Oh my gosh. I have to like put that in my back pocket. When I argue with somebody and I have a big ego moment, I'll just tell them that you think I'm a celebrity.
Yes, put it on a sticky note, sticky note, and keep it next to your computer, okay?
Yeah, just name drop us everywhere.
Everywhere.